Okay, moving on to, let me get my agenda out, 12.2, which is the adopt a resolution authorizing a reduction in force, reduction in hours, transfer to other funding sources, mandatory employee furloughs, reduction in salaries and benefits in lieu of furloughs, and service cuts in order to maintain fiscal sustainability, and authorizing the city manager to take all necessary actions to implement the fiscal year 2008-9 mid-year budget revision and approving budget adjustment number 2008-09-0102. And there won't be a test on those numbers. So, Nancy?
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I'm here to talk about the mid-year budget cuts that we had discussed in previous council meetings. If I could have Sandra advance the next slide, that would be great. Just to provide you a little bit of history, I started here on June 30th, and in October I brought you a revised budget. I brought the previous council revised budget and a budget update at that point. And at that time we did discuss the issues regarding the general fund shortfall. On January 20th, I provided another update to council that showed, again, the revenue situation deteriorating as well as the expenditure side increasing. So our shortfall became slightly greater. We were using greater reserves, and I'll get to that in a minute. And at that point, we had a discussion on that, and then tonight is the night that I'm bringing back the actual resolution that is making the cuts for this fiscal year. So this is a mid-year cut that we're talking about, that are effective as of March 1st, and then the cuts that we're talking about for fiscal year 09-10 we will be discussing in detail in some of the cuts we'll be talking about as early as next month, but the majority of cuts we'll be talking in May during the budget hearings, okay? Next. So just some highlights of the general fund, and I'm just going to go very brief. These slides were very similar to the slides you saw back in January 20th. As you can see, our adopted budget, this was approved by your previous city manager, interim city manager. There was an adopted budget of $14.6 million in revenues. However, based on our recalculations of sales tax, property tax, the new estimate is now $13.8 million for this fiscal year, the year that we're currently in. That's a variance of about $863,000. Our budget estimate for expenditures for this fiscal year was $15.5 million, and our revised projections are $15.6. This is without the cuts, point that out, or an increase of $146,000. We had estimated back in June, again, prior to my arrival, that the reserves would only be tapped about $842,000. But at the rate of the difference between our revenues and expenditures that we project, the amount is $1.8 million, and you can see that's a large variance into our reserves. Just real highlights, see some of the variances with the property tax, it's significant, as well as our sales tax, a significant drop. Those are the two primary key drivers of the general fund, as well as development, again, has not been occurring in the city, so therefore the projections are lower. You can see the total revenues and transfers, that the difference between 14.6 and 13.8 shows the total of $863,000. On our expenditure side, we had, again, went through detail. I had staff, when I arrived, had them go line by line, very detailed, pragmatic review of everyone's salary, benefits, and so on, and we looked at every position in the city. So with that, and we had a new estimate, and you know, again, and this is when you're developing a budget, you really have to drill down to the detail, and so that's what we started doing. And when we came up with our estimates in October and January, those estimates reflect on those salary numbers. Our operating expenses, again, were different than what was projected. Not a whole lot, but they were up higher. Our capital was the same. Our transfers was actually a little bit different, and we'll explain what that is later. It had to do with the sales tax contract that we had with KBI. That's why the transfer's lower. And so those are the totals that you see the difference between the fiscal year. We originally thought we'd have expenditures of 15.5, however, revised projected of 15.6. And with the cuts that I'm recommending, we will be down at $15 million for this fiscal year. Okay, if you look at the first column, if the situation where we thought we would be in, we thought we'd be ending the fiscal year at a 13.5% reserve. However, with the change of with the change of the revenues, again, the picture, we would be different 11%. And that includes, of course, the cut that I have included is what I project, and then 8% with the cut that I'm projecting in 09-10 that we will need to get, and that's $1.9 million. And again, there was a spreadsheet that I provided in the staff report that shows the 5-year projection, and that details why $581,000 is the cut and why $1.9 million is the cut in the year 2009-10. This slide is very similar to the slide you saw on January 20th. You can see the blue section is with the cuts of the organization. We're making cuts. We actually stay positive in the general fund. If we do nothing and sit idle, we will actually run out of cash next fiscal year to the point of $1.2 million. So we cannot be in that situation. We need to make the cuts now in the mid-year time frame and to stay basically in the blue bar area versus the red bar area. This is just a visual. Okay, and here's the actual math of the cash flow analysis. Again, this was covered on January 20th, but you can see the scenario of doing nothing. We drop our percentage of reserves down. We're down to an ending fund balance of $1 million, which is very low. And with the cuts for this fiscal year, by making a cut of $581,950, we have an ending reserve of 11%, or $1.6 million. And then the following section of the slide just shows without cuts. Again, it shows dramatically what happens to our cash flow if we do nothing. And so that's, again, we're not in fiscal year 09-10. I'm showing you the future if we do nothing is what this slide shows you. And you can see, without cuts, if we do nothing, we end up at a negative reserve of 7.9%, a negative cash of $1.2 million. If we make the cuts of $581,000 this fiscal year, starting March 1, and then if we make a cut of $1.9 million effective July 1, that's the budget hearings I'm talking about in May, we will end the year based on the best calculations at 8.77% reserve. So that's and the 8% is my recommendation for a minimum reserve level for the general fund. So specifically, there's different areas how we're coming up with the $581,000. The first area is service cuts. In the resolution tonight, there was an Exhibit A that talked about specifically by account code the service cuts that added up to $208,023. That is a category of various things in the general fund, from training to equipment to programs. They're not personnel related to city personnel. They could be contract personnel, but not city personnel. The next category is $113,000. Those are for 2 vacancies that we have currently in the city that are full-time positions. And then there's also some positions that we're recommending that are transferred to other funds, specifically wastewater or the recreation fund. That's the $57,000 figure. Most importantly, I think this is something I want to describe. This is a furlough program. Every full-time employee, including myself, would participate in a furlough program. This generates $147,000 this fiscal year, and continuing on through next fiscal year, it will generate $442,000 savings. This is significant, and this is something we need to do to be able to address our shortfall. Every employee is treated fairly in this manner, and every employee that I have met and conferred with agrees with this process. So I want to point that out. We have very good employees here. I commend them. They've been working with me side by side to address our shortfall situation in the general fund. And so that is something that is, is a compliment to the employees here. I want to point that out. The next category is a category where we actually have 4 employees that are actually affected by losing their positions. We also have some employees that are being reduced in hours. This is all based on lack of work. They work in the development area, or lack of funds. It's a combination of the 2 things that why we're reducing those areas, and that adds up to about $155,000 this fiscal year and $574 next fiscal year. The final column, or final row, I guess,